Welcome to the VCO Workflow Inspection Lab. This video will focus on detecting workflow failures and generating an SNMP trap. To set this up, the scenario is as follows. Your customer has successfully implemented VCO to orchestrate several aspects of their business. In an effort to improve visibility into failed workflows, you have been asked to develop a solution capable of sending an SNMP trap if a workflow fails. In order for this lab to be successful, you must already have the SNMP plugin installed and a workflow capable of failing on demand. For this video, we will use our resume tester workflow from a previous lab since it allows us to easily trigger a workflow failure. This will allow us to quickly test SNMP trap generation. Before we get started with our custom workflow, we need to get SNMP configured and tested. First, we will create an SNMP device on our VCO server. To do so, run the register an SNMP device workflow. To quickly locate that particular workflow, you can use the search box in the top right-hand corner. Enter the name of the workflow and press enter. When the search results come up, double-click the one that you want to use, which will be the second one here. Once the element has been selected, you can click on the close window. We can see that register an SNMP device workflow is here and ready for us. Once you have the workflow selected, you can right-click on it and select Start Workflow. You can press Ctrl R, or if you're using a Mac, you can use the Command R. Or you can simply press the green Start Workflow icon here on the right-hand side. For device address, we're going to use the VCO server itself, so just enter localhost. For the name, we want to call it local SNMP device. We can leave advanced set to no. Click on submit. Okay, we've registered our device. Next, we'll need to tell VCO to listen for a trap. Run the wait for a trap on an SNMP device workflow. Once you have the wait for a trap on an SNMP device workflow selected, go ahead and right-click on it and start the workflow. For SNMP device, click on the Not Set link, position your Finder window here, and expand out your SNMP inventory object here. We can see here that we have our local SNMP device, so let's go ahead and select that. Click on Select, and for the OID, we're going to go ahead and just leave that empty. Click on Submit. Okay. Now our VCO server has the workflow running. It's sitting here and it's waiting for an event. That event is going to be your SNMP trap. So before we get started on our custom workflow, let's go ahead and test this and make sure things are actually working properly. In order to test it, we're going to just manually run send an SNMP trap. So go ahead and select that workflow and start it. Now for the manager address, we want to go ahead and specify localhost. For the manager port, we'll set that to 4000. Enterprise, we're just going to use something generic. Let's do 1234, so 1.2.3.4. For type, we're going to leave that as string. OID, we're going to set to 5.6.7.8. And for our value, let's go ahead and just enter this is a test. And click Submit. Now if we take a look at our wait for trap on an SNMP device workflow, we can see that the waiting icon has changed to a green check mark. So go ahead and click on there, and then click on the Logs tab to review what has been logged. We can see the Log tab here shows the OID, the type, the SNMP type, and the value. So this is a test, that's our value here. So now let's go ahead and pull all this together into our solution workflow. Now we're going to go down here to my project folder and I'm going to create a new workflow called Run Workflow and Send Trap on Failure. Let's go ahead and click on the new workflow icon there. Run Workflow and Send Trap on Failure. Alright, so now I have my new workflow in edit mode. I'm going to start off by going to the schema. And once we're on the schema tab, we're going to go ahead and keep the generic section selected on the left-hand side, select the workflow element and drag that over to the schema. Note the circle with the line through it. That is indicating that I cannot just drop the workflow there. I need to go ahead and mouse over the line between my elements of the workflow. So once I drop it there, is going to ask me which workflow do I want to use. So I'm just going to do a search for resume tester. Maybe just resume. There we go. So resume quickly shows me that I have a few different workflows with the word resume in it, and the one that I want is this 3A resume tester from our previous lab. So once I have that selected, I click on select, and I'm prompted, do you want to add the activities parameters as input, output to the current workflow? Since this is the first element that I'm dropping on the workflow, I'm going to go ahead and use the wizard. So click on setup. Now the input for this particular workflow is our Boolean is fail workflow, and the default is mapping type of input. I do want to prompt for that. I do want to do the input, so I'll click on promote, and there we go. So now if we run this workflow, it's the same as the previous lab. We'll be prompted as to whether or not we want to fail the workflow, and depending on our selection, the workflow will either complete successfully or it will fail. Now since we want to have an error handler on here that sends an SNMP trap, we need to go ahead and do a little more work on this before we consider the workflow done. Let's drag our workflow element again, and we just put it on top of the existing element. So what that's going to do is, since we already have a path for success, this is going to add our exception handling path. So once I release the workflow onto the schema on the existing element there, I have my chooser to choose which particular workflow I want to run. So in this case, I want the send an SNMP trap workflow. So there we go. There's our send an SNMP trap. So I'll just double click that. And note that the VCO client has automatically generated our red dashed line for our exception path. This time for the setup wizard, I'm going to just click no so that I can do things manually. Now I do need to add another end workflow point here, so let me go ahead and get that onto the schema. And again, I'll just drop that on an existing element, and that creates my endpoint. So now I do still need to take a look at the send an SNMP trap to determine what inputs are needed and what outputs. But before I do that, adding an exception path to this resume tester workflow means that I now have an exception variable that I need to bind. So in order to review that, I'm going to click on edit. Now we click on the exception tab. Output exception binding is currently set as not set. So we want to click on that, and we're going to create a parameter attribute in the workflow. Now the default is error code. That's fine. We'll go ahead and keep that. So whatever the exception is that gets sent out by that particular workflow is going to sit inside this text variable. So we'll go ahead and click OK, and we'll close. This piece of our workflow is now done. We're ready to move on to the SNMP trap. So go ahead and select that, and then click on the edit icon. Now if we take a look at our inputs, we see that we need to specify our address, port, enterprise, type, OID, and value. So again, the address, port, enterprise, type, and OID, we're going to use the same values that we used earlier in our test. Let's go ahead and get these other values set here. So address, we need to create a new attribute for that. And we're going to set the value to localhost. Okay. And port, create one for there. We'll set that to 4000. Okay. Enterprise, create parameter. Do that 1.2.3.4. Okay. Okay, for type, we'll click on the not set, create parameter. And for the type, we want to do string with a capital S. Click OK. Our OID, we want to create another one there. Set that to 5.6.7.8. Click OK. And for the value, we're not going to create anything new. We're going to use the error code from our workflow failure. So click on select, and close that. Click on validate. Good. Close. Now let's go back to our General tab and scroll up. Make sure that you've incremented your version. Put a brief description there. I just call it initial version. And enter a description. Here's what I entered. This workflow will attempt to run resume test workflow. If that workflow fails or throws an exception, an SNMP trap will be generated. So I'll go ahead and save and close that. And continue anyway. I don't need to increment the version again. Now before we run this as a test to make sure that things are working, we need to go ahead and tell our VCO SNMP service to listen for the trap. So let's go back up to the wait for a trap on an SNMP device and right-click on the existing workflow execution and select Run Again. Now the benefit in doing that is it'll go ahead and pre-populate our SNMP device so that we don't need to browse the inventory to locate it again. Alright, as we did before in the test, we're going to leave OID as blank, click on Submit. And once we see the workflow is waiting, we're going to go ahead and scroll back down to our new custom workflow, and we'll run that. Now, shall the workflow fail? I'm going to set that to yes. Click on Submit. Now, if we take a look at our logs here, it says workflow failed because the user decided so. And now, to see our SNMP trap information, come up here to the Wait for a Trap on SNMP device. We want to select the most recent one that completed, and we can see here the value, workflow failed because user decided so. So here we had a workflow execution that failed, and our SNMP acted as our error handler by generating a trap and sending that to an SNMP device. In this particular scenario, we used the VCO server as our SNMP listening device, but this could have easily been any other monitoring system. Thank you.